Well, hello. My name is Angelle Wood, and this is Crime of the Truest Kind. Well, hello, and how do you do? Welcome back to the show. Season 4 commences now. What kind of summer did you have? I really did try to make the most of it. But where did the time go? My name is Angelle Wood. This is Crime of the Truest Kind, Massachusetts and New England crime stories. We get a bit of a history lesson, and I walk you through the stories, things that happen here, about the people and places. Thank you to everyone who has supported the show. Thank you to Patreon supporters. 4 tiers starting at just $1. Patreon.com/crime of the truest kind. I will talk a bit more about that. Support the show. Tell your friends. Follow. Subscribe. Leave a 5-star rating and review at Apple Podcasts. Subscribe to the mailing list. Buy some merch. I have new merch rolling out this fall. Everything at crimeofthetruestkind.com. A lot has been going on in our neck of the woods. There was a major trial that took place this summer. It got beyond national attention, international attention. Now, admittedly, I have not followed the Karen Read trial like some of you have, but it has been instrumental in bringing to the forefront the story of a 23-year-old girl who was found in her apartment in Canton, Massachusetts in February of 2021. Welcome to Season 4. Technically, this is the 3rd year of Crime of the Truest Kind because I did take a longer than expected hiatus, but we were back in full force. Next live show, we cover North Shore crime cases. Thursday night, October 10th, back at Off Cabot in Beverly. Tickets are available right now. This is episode 69. Justice for Sandra Birchmore, Stoughton, Massachusetts. Justice for Sandra Birchmore. We see these pages and these hashtags, but what does it all mean? In an attempt to put the life of an actual living, breathing, loving person into focus, we break down some of the more overlooked facts of this very sad story. Now, her case has gained a great deal more traction in the last few weeks. And I want to thank Susanne Cleveland from the Justice for Sandra Birchmore movement for taking the time to walk me through Sandra's story. We spoke quite a bit. In the second half of this episode, I talked to Susanne Cleveland. Susanne has been an extraordinary advocate and speaking to Sandra's story with such care and empathy. And I appreciate her so much for doing that. So in an attempt to put the life of an actual living, breathing, loving person into focus, I will talk about Sandra's story. It is a case, a criminal case, one of misconduct and abuse of power, one of deception and coercion, one of grooming and child sexual abuse. So please, listen with care. I go forth with the express intention to illuminate what went on in Sandra's life and avoidable death. Sandra's story, like so many other victims of violent crime, has been turned into internet fodder, made for shocking headlines, a source for the looky-loos and the kind of detectives that is a now constant source of churning social media content to, well, satiate a rabid public. There are parallels between Sandra's case and the very publicized and frenzied case surrounding the death of Boston police officer John O'Keefe in what became the Karen Read murder trial. And while I readily admit to not following the twists and turns of that case leading up to the start of the trial, and not injecting myself into that case in any way, to say there's nothing to see here would be disingenuous. I did a 2-part recap at the start of that trial, and someone left me a review on Apple Podcasts. I had to laugh because, well, I will quote it. I had to shut this off a few minutes in because it was just women tearing down another woman who has not been convicted of a crime because of her clothes. Disappointing. What year is it? Well, bitch, it's 2024, and you should listen to more than 2 minutes before you leave a misinformed review. I will review your review. Sorry you don't understand sarcasm. And do you only read the headlines and none of the articles? I share that with my tongue in cheek since that person could really give a shit what I think. Hate my show, but listen longer than 2 minutes. The last thing I will say about that and the Reed thing, I called it. I called a mistrial. But this is about Sandra Birchmore, not Reed. And the two are not alike at all. Reed is alive, and she will have a life. Sandra is not. And no one seemed to care for a very long time. And I will do my best to give you a clear setup of the players in this case for anyone in Massachusetts who isn't paying attention. I'm sure there are some of you. And everyone whose nightly news hasn't picked up on Sandra's story yet. We traveled to the town of Stoughton. Stoughton. A town with an approximate population of just under 29,000 people. Surrounding towns are Canton, Brockton, Sharon, Randolph, Easton. And one thing no one from Massachusetts will really cop to, we often say, where the fuck is that? When some smaller town, less familiar to us, may be cited in some story. Or, where the fuck is that? Named after William Stoughton, appointed Chief Justice of the Salem witch trials, because that went so well. It'll take an hour to Worcester. Logan Airport is about 30 minutes away at the minimum. 2 names stood out to me among the list of notables from the town of Stoughton. One is Lori McKenna, Grammy Award-winning singer and in-demand songwriter. She has, as her bio states, carved out an enviable niche for herself as one of Nashville's most in-demand songwriters, all while maintaining a prolific and remarkably consistent career as a solo artist. She reportedly still lives in Stoughton with her family. She has co-written things like I'll Bet You Think About Me with Taylor Swift. The list goes on. Morgan Wade, Maren Morris, Little Big Town Faith Hill, Miranda Lambert, Tim McGraw, The Highwaywomen with Brandi Carlile, Reba McEntire, Carrie Underwood. Impressive? Indeed. The next one impressive for different reasons. Nicola Sacco, one half of Sacco and Vanzetti, the infamous Italian-born prohibition anarchist duo believed to have pulled off the April 15th, 1920 armed heist at the Slater & Morrill Shoe Company in Braintree, Massachusetts. Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti, they faced a controversial murder trial that saw their conviction and death sentence for the murders of F.A. Parmenter, a shoe factory paymaster. Today, that would be, accounts payable? And the guard who accompanied him to deliver the payroll, Alessandro Miradel. It was the height of the Red Scare and symbolized the prejudiced views against immigrants, labor unions, and political radicals that were fueled by the Department of Justice raids known as the Palmer Raids. Those happened in targeted communities. They recalled that derogatory term of the time, WOP, W-O-P. Its etymology, I learned, is specifically meant for people of Italian descent, a pejorative term, derived from the Spanish guapo, meaning good-looking, but not to be confused with the modern-day WAP, the Cardi B, and Megan the W-A-P. Like Vince Vaughn says on Old School, earmuff it for me. If you're sensitive to modern slang, W-A-P stands for wet-ass pussy. Sorry to ruin the surprise. The men went on trial on May 31st, 1921. before Judge Webster Thayer at the Massachusetts Superior Court. And on July 14th, both were found guilty by verdict of the jury. Socialists and radicals protested their innocence, saying their arrest and trial was unfair and the men were only convicted due to their radical anarchist beliefs rather than for the crime for which they had been tried. Despite a 1925 confession by Celestino Medeiros, a Portuguese immigrant convicted of murder, he was in jail with Sacco when he sent Sacco a note indicating that he was in the Dedham jail in November 1925 with Sacco when he sent Sacco a note that he was involved in the armed robbery as part of the Joe Morelli gang. Now, the Morelli gang, a gang of Italians who robbed freight cars in Rhode Island and Massachusetts, led by Joe Morelli, included his brothers Mike, Patsy, Butsy, and Fred, as well as Bibba Barone, Gip the Blood, or Jip the Blood. I'm not sure on that. Mancini, Celestino Medeiros, and Steve the Pole. That gang were suspects all along, according to the New Bedford police, until Sacco and Vanzetti were arrested. A motion for a new trial based on this revelation denied. The state Supreme Court refused to upset the verdict because, at that time, the trial judge had the final power to reopen a case on the grounds of additional evidence. Sacco and Vanzetti were sentenced to death on April 9th, 1927. It was met with massive protests. Then Governor Alvin Tufts Fuller appointed an independent advisory committee consisting of presidents from Harvard and MIT and a former judge. On August 3rd, 1927, the governor refused to exercise his power of clemency. His advisory committee agreed with this stand. Demonstrations spread across the country and in cities across the globe. Bombs went off in New York City and Philadelphia. They were anarchists after all. The men maintained their innocence throughout the 7 years of legal appeals and the many international protests. But Sacco and Vanzetti were executed by electrocution at Charlestown State Prison on August 23, 1927. Gang member Medeiros, the man who confessed to the shoe factory armed robbery and murders, he too was electrocuted that same night for murdering a bank cashier. Now, Sacco had been on a hunger strike and his body lacked the salt and water that conducts the electricity. So his voltage was ratcheted way up to ensure death would be swift. The subject of their guilt remains a divided topic. If the two men were innocent victims of a prejudiced legal system and a mishandled trial. Many historians believe, however, that the men should have been granted a second trial in view of their trial's significant defects. Sounds familiar. On the 50th anniversary of their execution, on August 23, 1977, then Governor Mike Dukakis issued a proclamation stating that Sacco and Vanzetti had been treated unfairly. There was clearly bias due to their anarchist associations, something prevalent in the 1920s with subversives and disruptors considered known threats. Take the Boston molasses flood, for example. It was first blamed on those subversives, but we learned it was just gross negligence. Some might say the modern-day version of an anarchist is a libertarian. Now, I don't talk politics here, you know this. It takes away from the importance of the victim's story. But to back that comment, libertarianism.com says, anarchism and libertarianism, two sides of the same coin. Early anarchist thinkers blurred the line between socialist and capitalist. End of topic. Who knew Stoughton had such history? Please support crime of the truest kind, and there are a number of ways to do so. Listen to the show. Tell your friends about it. Share it on social media. Leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Go to the merch store. Buy some merch. Drop a tip in the jar. Give the dogs a bone. Really, my dogs are obsessed. Become a patron on Patreon with 4 tiers starting at just $1. All links at crimeofthetruestkind.com. Crime Timelines does a tremendous job with detail and timeline in this case and several others. Sandra Marie Birchmore was born on May 13th, 1997 in Stoughton. She is the only child of her mother, Denise, who raised her with her grandmother Grace and her Aunt Claire. Grace passed away in 2001 when Sandra was 4. Her Aunt Claire, Grace's sister, stepped in as proxy and remained close to Sandra and her mom, Denise. During her adolescence, Sandra would attend enrichment programs for behavioral and social development. One such program was the Respect program in 2005 when she was 8. In 2006, Sandra attended the 14-week Strengthening Family Program, SFP, for high-risk families. This was sponsored by the Stoughton Youth Commission. In 2010, when she was 12, Sandra learned about the Youth Explorers program from the Stoughton Police and set her sights on joining that program with the goal of becoming a police officer one day. In March of 2010, she was put on the standby list for the program, and by spring, she was enrolled. Here is where the intersection of the players in this case begins. Starting with Robert C. Devine and the introduction of the 2 Farwell brothers who are, yes indeed, key players. Now, I'm going to run through this, so keep your ears open. September 1998, 12-year-old twin brothers Matthew and William Farwell. From here on, they are MF and WF. They joined the Police Explorers program to address behavioral issues at school. Question, though, were the Farwell brothers abused? If so, by whom? 1999, Devine becomes an advisor for the Police Explorers. 2001 through 2004, Devine serves as a school resource officer. Devine takes over Stoughton Police Explorers program beginning in 2003. Same year, Devine brings in former explorers Matthew and William Farwell, MF, WF, as guest instructors. They are 17. Matthew Farwell was suspended from Stoughton High for attendance and eventually dropped out in 11th grade. 2003, Devine and Detective Roger Hardy, Stoughton Police Juvenile Detective and School Resource Officer, opened a gym at the O'Connell Middle School. A sidebar. Oddly, there is another Roger Hardy with unfortunate legal problems. A Dr. Roger Ian Hardy, a once sought-after fertility doctor, with a list of accusations from women who say he sexually assaulted or inappropriately touched them that date back more than 3 decades. Dr. Roger Ian Hardy reportedly surrendered his license to practice medicine and moved to Thailand. Status as of today, I don't think Dr. Roger Ian Hardy has faced any consequences to said sexual abuse. Now, this Officer Hardy, nothing to do with that Dr. Hardy, appears to still be with the Stoughton Police Department. 2004 through 2006, Devine serves as Sergeant of Stoughton PD. He is made Lieutenant in 2006. In 2008, Devine was named Executive Officer for his cooperation with prosecutors during the investigation into corruption involving a chief and a sergeant. He gets an award for his do-gooding in 2011. In 2012, Devine serves as the acting chief while the current chief trains with the FBI. In 2013, Devine is named the department's first deputy chief and works with youth programs like the Police Explorers Academy and Oasis, organizing against substance abuse in Stoughton. Matthew Farwell, MF. 2003, he dropped out of high school junior year. 2004, earns a GED in Maine, enlists in the Army, trains as an explosives expert. In 2006, he takes a 6-month deployment in Afghanistan. 2008, MF returns to Massachusetts. His military service has ended, and he was hired by Wellesley Police Department, where he works from 2008 to 2012. 2010, during his time on Wellesley PD, MF met Sandra Birchmore as part of the Explorers program. She is 13. He is 11 years her senior. His grooming begins. 2011. Sandra is a freshman at high school. MF begins showing up at the school library under the guise of helping her study. On October 28, 2012, MF sends a Facebook friend request to the 14-year-old Sandra. 2012, MF gets commendations, including one for performing CPR on a man who collapsed in the gym. Not a lot of crime in Wellesley. March 2012, MF is hired by Stoughton PD. Robert Devine is on the hiring board. In 2013, Sandra was 15. MF is 27. He began to sexually abuse her. This is statutory rape under Massachusetts law. Full stop. Meanwhile, MF is in a public adult relationship with a woman named Michelle, whom he marries on May 11th, 2013, while he is sexually abusing a teenage girl. Sandra writes about this in her journal, describing her encounters with MF. It is not a relationship. It is not a love story. It is not an affair, nor is he her boyfriend. She is a child. This is sexual abuse that continues. Sandra's journal entries detail continuous and sometimes violent sexual encounters with MF, like using sex acts to punish her. According to these journal entries, Matthew Farwell would engage in forceful sex acts to punish her for her mistakes, such as bad grades, failing to share her cell phone location. In the 45-page affidavit issued on August 28, 2024, upon the arrest of Matthew Farwell, charged with Sandra's murder, text messages between the two, where she cites their first sexual encounter as April 10th, 2013, 5 days before the Boston Marathon bombing, when she is 15. MF continues to abuse her. There are implications of Devine and brother William Farwell also participating in this abuse. It can't stop with just Sandra, though, can it? In the spring of 2015, Sandra graduated from high school, and that meant her participation in the Explorers program came to an end. But the involvement of those officers did not. Things take a tectonic shift in her life in 2016, when on May 18th, just 5 days after she turns 19, her mother dies after a years-long illness that has never been specified in any reporting, none that I could find. Her mom was just 52. 1 month later, she loses her Auntie Claire, her proxy grandmother, after her grandmother Grace passed away. It's emotional upheaval for Sandra, and with two losses so close together, makes it that much more difficult. Records show she struggled. There were thoughts of self-harm, documented, but she used that energy to move forward the best she could. She went on to take the Massachusetts Civil Service exam to be eligible to join the police force. Text messages exchanged between Sandra and Farwell show the hold that he still had on her. In 2018, Sandra went to the shelter in Stoughton to adopt a cat. There she met a man named Joshua Heel, the animal control officer for the town. They formed a friendship, and she would tell him about MF, how he was tracking her location, how he knew she was at the shelter, and demanding to know why. She shared a number of things with Heel. Perhaps she trusted him. According to Joshua Heel, they engaged in a consensual sex act after working hours at the shelter. When questioned later, he said Sandra said, among other things, that her goal was to have a family where her and MF would live together and have children together and live, quote, happily ever after. While the two did fall out of touch, they remained Facebook friends. And adding to the pain and isolation, Sandra miscarried in 2020. In those last months of her life, she was trying to make improvements, going to therapy, taking medication. She had gotten her own apartment in Canton, and she was hired at East Elementary School in Sharon as an instructional assistant. She had struggles. When questioned, her coworkers said she overshared, telling them personal details, unsolicited, and sometimes making them uncomfortable. And many of them knew she was involved with a Stoughton cop. MF remained a presence in her life. Given her lack of experience in healthy relationships, she held on. He reportedly helped her move into her new apartment, but his behavior became increasingly more erratic. He was always violent. He was always abusive and controlling. It got worse. In October 2020, Sandra found out that MF's wife was pregnant with baby number 3. Learning that was painful for her. She wanted to tell his wife about the 10 years he'd been having sex with Sandra, abusing her. Let's get it right. It was Josh Heel who told Sandra about the wife, and she told Heel that she had been pregnant before by MF. Sandra decided that she would tell MF, have a baby with her, or she would spill their secret. Though she didn't hold back on telling people about who she called her boyfriend, a cop. By the end of 2020, she was pregnant again. MF was cruel. Why would he start being kind now? This confrontation where she said, "This is what I want," was a turning point. Feeling the pressure, losing control, afraid of being exposed for the monster he is, MF began to forge his evil plan that concluded with the discovery of 23-year-old Sandra Birchmore, deceased in her Windsor Woods apartment on February 4th, 2021. Police were called for a wellness check after she had missed several days of work. The last person to see her alive was Matthew Farwell, because cameras don't lie. He is all over her apartment building's camera footage. He is seen entering the building. He is seen exiting her building. It's all caught on camera, the last moments of her life. I talked to Susanne Cleveland, who has been a force in the justice for Sandra Birchmore movement. This is part 1 of our conversation. I read through the 45-page document. I have subsequently been reading through some other information about the other players in this case. And I come up with the same feeling every time, Susanne, that I'm pissed off about men deciding the fate of women. And this comes down to a lot of that for me in this true crime space that I have found myself in. I know Sandra's case has been in the news for a couple of years post when she passed away. Now that this one perpetrator has been arrested and taken into custody and is facing some pretty substantial charges, and people are really just now starting to find out what happened.
People are learning. People are saying, holy shit, what do we do? Not that nobody was noticing, it's that there's this shocking, sad story, and then there's a big space in between any subsequent action, and it's just all hitting a lot of people at once, and we're doing our best as thoughtful communicators in this world, in this crazy world of true crime, and trying to approach answers to these questions in an empathic and compassionate way, but while also being absolutely furious and disgusted that this situation could happen and for such an extensive period, and for her and her unborn baby to die.
Going back through the history of Sandra being involved in starting with the Explorers program when she was, 12 and 13 years old, that's an incredibly impressionable time for anyone. I feel like that may have caused a little bit of arrested development in a woman like Sandra.
She was certainly looking for some guidance and some protection and some way to channel this. The way it's sort of been described to me by loved ones and friends is this boundless energy and this, this desire to put good into the world and to be a caretaker and to, be a rescuer. So, as an energetic child, she was looking for ways to be just like we all are, right? And at that point in her life as a young child, her mother and grandmother were embracing and encouraging that and looking for guidance too. Where to put your child, where to send them to harness their energy and to do good things. And it started even before age 12. As a precocious child, she was seeking, activities and things to do, and her family was seeking enrichment programs, through the school that were touted as, bonding experiences between mother and daughter, but also exposing to, programs, fun activities. And that's where fade in to the scene, we have Robert Devine as a school resource officer, sort of. I don't really know how to paint the picture, but we'll just say that he was present and making it known that there were great new initiatives that the kids could participate in, and that he was going to be their fearless leader into those programs. And to his own sort of words, he wanted to get the families involved right away so that he could let them know we're all family, which is where the subject of grooming comes in.
He wanted to get as close as possible, it seems. That harkens back for me, and probably you as well, Susanne, what we learned about the Catholic Church in Boston.
Of course, there's a lot of parallel. I mean, this has got all the elements of that type of grooming, coercive, just horrendous behavior that I refer to as sort of hiding in plain sight. You lull the families into a feeling of safety and community, and with the Catholic Church is, we're together in the name of religion.
Right.
What could be more pure than that?
Right.
In Sandra's case, it happened to be law enforcement, protect and serve. That was sort of, I would say, and I don't think the family would begrudge this statement, that protect and serve was her religion.
She was doing something pretty common for a child her age. And to the credit of her family, to the credit of Sandra's family, they were doing all the right things. A lot of us didn't have family members who were probably that in tune to us, and they were doing all the right things.
They were feeding into her, quest for belonging.
Absolutely.
She was wanting to do all the things and was energetic. It wasn't misguided on their part, because the reality is, I mean, when you're looking for ways to strengthen your family and enrich your child's life, you're not thinking about that there's a predator amongst that community. You're thinking this is a safe place for my child to go. And you also had the person there cheerleading, this effort, and welcoming it. And it looked, I mean, at the onset of it, it was looking good. Sandra was thriving in these programs, and getting excited for all of the activities that she was in, and was seemingly doing well.
Her mom was a good mom. She had her grandmother before they passed. That is one of the many misconceptions about this story, is that she's been created in the news, and Lord knows the internet, they cycle their own garbage into every story. But she had a very involved mom. She had involved family members. She still to this day has involved family members who are very careful with what happens to the story. The family does not want anybody to profit off the memory of her.
That's correct. But also they have to be extremely cautious because they're in the midst of the civil suit, which it could be argued that that the civil suit process is what, in a lot of ways, it commanded the action that is going on now, because there wasn't any action going on. There was a lot of inaction. But yes, when people are asking, where's the family in all of this, it's important for them to know that the family who was present at the onset of this process, they were very close knit and a very loving family. They were lulled into this atmosphere. They were assured, you know what, we've got you. She's, we're all family. We're looking out for her. So as things furthered along into Sandra's teen years, when her mother struggled with some illness, and inevitably passed away, they were under the belief that she was in good hands. And then shortly thereafter, her grandmother, who was her secondary caretaker, or I would say both primary caretakers, passed away as well. And then her favorite aunt passed away not too long after that. This poor girl went through a lot of heartbreak and loss in her family. And there are still many, many more family members who adored her and are present in ways, however they can be in this process. But we also have to take into consideration that people are allowed to choose, particularly if they're in some state of grief, or I guess I don't want to get too highfalutin with the psychological terms, but disenfranchised grief,
Yeah.
which is, fancy way of saying, where do you put that grief? We don't even know what it is. You all, and I say you all, I'm actually starting to wring my hands with frustration. You all told us that she died by suicide. We're trying to grapple with that, but we don't believe that that's what happened. And we know that they were right.
Because they knew that she was so excited and so looking forward to having this baby. That's really all she wanted at that place in her life. Is all she wanted was to have that baby.
There's too many tragic things to list here, but at the top of the list is that Sandra was making it known that she wanted to thrive and that she wanted to have a life, and that having this baby was the way to do it. However we feel about the messiness of it, or how it came to be, she was going to do it, and by all rights, she deserved to be able to carve out her place in the world however she chose to. And it was taken away by the person who was hurting her the most for at least 8 years.
It's incredible to me. There's a lot of things that are incredible about this case to me, and I'm sure that you have even more insight than I know you have more insight than I do about this case. It's incredible to me that the things that went on, at least 3 law enforcement officers / detectives were involved in abusing this girl turned woman. How many people look the other way? I don't know if we'll get an answer to that question ever, but it's very obvious that somewhere along the line, somebody could have maybe stepped in to try to help. And it seems as though some of Sandra's own friends eventually did that much later on, calling the police department, etc. Right?
Well, there was an effort to. It's the friend's story to tell about how that came to be, for sure. But there had to have been some sort of, I don't know if the right word is panic. Certainly people knew that this situation was going on, and that they were encouraging Sandra to take care of herself and to find a way to be healthy, in spite of the fact that it was a clearly unhealthy situation. So whether you want to call it warning signs or finding, some type of way to stir the nest and get eyes on it, I can't put myself in those shoes personally, because I want to believe if I had a hint of a nuance that somebody I loved was in a situation like that, I would be a human wrecking ball. But how can you be when you're dealing with the force of an entire police department, and the fact that she was consistently telling anybody who cared about her, I love this person. She basically loved all of them because she was a loving, caring person, and wanted to be and idolized these officers. I kind of have trouble saying officers because I don't even want to give them, they don't really deserve the integrity of being considered law enforcement officials, obviously, but she was idolizing and looking up to them, and they turned that into something so ugly and so awful. And I'm sure that her loved ones suffered through some confusion and not knowing what to do, but also there's fear. I mean, when it comes to situations where there is violence and ongoing abuse amongst law enforcement professionals, they don't even tell on each other because the threat or fear of retaliation and violence is imminent throughout that time. So now you have, average random folks like me and what we think we're just going to march in. And by the way, along the way, this is an interesting sort of tangent, if you'll allow. At some point, there was a person who did get agitated about something that seemed not right going on with this Explorers program, which was another individual who was being groomed by Robert Devine. And God bless her, she did take something that she found in her daughter's room, which was a love letter that she wrote to Robert Devine, and she marched her ass into that police station, slammed it on someone's desk, and said, "What is this? What is going on in this department?" And you know what was done with it?
You're going to tell me.
Pretty much nothing. It was put into a file folder.
They put it in the drawer and locked it away.
Yes. Well, it was actually a W.B. Mason box, but yes.
To be absolutely specific, and that's really important in this case. These facts are the most important going forward because, look, anybody who has listened to my show probably has figured out now that I can be very irreverent when I talk about these cases, never at the expense of a victim or the victim's family. But I will tell you, these motherfuckers got to go down.
Yes, they do.
These motherfuckers got to go down. In Massachusetts, my beloved home state, yours as well, we look like absolute morons for a lot of people outside looking in, due in large part to all of the headlines that have gone national and international over the course of the last couple of years, based in the fair town of Canton, Massachusetts. I'm saying this for myself, and you can say at any point whatever you want about the case, but to deal with the John O'Keefe / Karen Reed story is a whole entire rabbit hole, a whole entire, series of episodes. But I am grateful. I am grateful that Sandra's case has gotten more attention just for the sheer fact that that got so much attention. I know you can speak to this because you have had interaction with a lot of the folks who have been part of Karen Reed's support team.
Yes, there is definitely a symbiosis between the cases, and it has definitely lent to a groundswell of support for Sandra. In the din of all of that, okay, we were already outraged because you have this high profile case, and at the very least, a whole shit ton of investigative mishaps. And then as we chug along, some abysmally misogynistic and shaming and mental health damning and health issue damning behavior that was just gut wrenching to hear and observe at the very least. And when I think about that in perspective with the details of Sandra's story, I almost want to say, it's not, it doesn't fit the situation, but hold my beer because you are not ready to hear the Google search involved with this monster. You're not ready to hear what Trooper Fanning decided was not critical to the investigation, including that monstrous video that we've all looked at and said, "Holy shit, that motherfucker did this to her." We took 2 seconds, saw that video. You've seen it. We've all seen it, and said, why isn't he in jail? Wait, I'm sorry. Trooper Fanning, you pulled up next to him in a parking lot and you had a casual, like, I picture your arm on the door, leaning in, little chit chat. about a 23-year-old deceased pregnant woman that this man had an extensive relationship with.
Who he subsequently made jokes about how they found her?
Yes, he did.
It's unforgivable, quite frankly. I'm sure that the family members of these men are reeling, but it can't be any sort of surprise to a lot of these people, because if this is the way they're treating someone, if this is the way they're treating someone like Sandra, it's not limited to Sandra. They have to, in some way, shape, or form, also be treating loved ones similarly.
Well, I would say the same to any of the loved ones who have suffered through or incurred this behavior, that I would to the, I fear, countless victims in this case.
Mhm.
That there are resources, there are confidential places to go. We now know about them. Most of us have known about resources that you can go to for quite a while. There aren't a lot of big bright spots right now, but certainly with Matthew Farwell's apprehension, the seismic shift in that process has definitely created a little tiny opening for anyone who was thinking, I'm not safe to do anything, I can't move forward, or how am I going to live through this? Well, that motherfucker is in a holding cell right now, and you can get help because all eyes are on this case right now. And there's still more work to do because there are still two others at the very least, and there's no getting around that. It's already provable that the others were involved in her harm for an extensive period, definitely orchestrated and continued this behavior for a long time. Did they do exactly what he did? I guess in the world of law enforcement and in legal terminology, they weren't physically there, but you all destroyed her. You all participated in her death. It's already awful when it was, earmarked as a suicide,
Yeah.
which it wasn't. It was already awful then, and you were already responsible then. And now here we are, and there's two that are still out there, and there's one that should have been locked up immediately.
They took complete and utter advantage of a vulnerable girl, and taking advantage of a vulnerable girl in the way that they have is certainly not exclusive to this program, I'm quite sure. But the fact that you have the mindset, my mind is blown at the fact that the mindset of these men is like this. When I read that 45-page affidavit about Matthew Farwell, where they really fully detail, and things shift for Sandra. She wants to have a baby and she makes a plan. However she decides to do this is not up to us to judge, or she wanted to do this and she decided that it was going to happen, and she wanted it to be with him, apparently. When she started to gain a little bit of agency, things started to shift. And when Sandra started to get some control, what an animal came out in him,
Yes.
more so than had been previous. I mean, he's an animal for doing what he did for that whole entire time, starting when she was a teenager. But you saw that shift, and he became increasingly angry and vengeful.
See, when somebody refers to the uptick or the escalation in this case, and they say that he suddenly became violent, this is where I have a difficult time sort of keeping my reaction down. I'm sorry, are you
It always
having
was.
trouble understanding that statutory rape is not violence? Are you having trouble understanding that 8+ years of grooming and coercive control is not fucking violence? Is
Mhm.
that a difficult concept to understand?
Right.
And that was the version of, I don't like saying relationship. That's the only relationship that Sandra got to experience, because it started when she was a child.
When I say arrested development, I mean it. I mean it in terms of she didn't have anything else to measure by. This is the only emotional relationship. I mean, yes, we know it was abusive. There was an emotional for her, certainly as a young woman turning, young girl turning into a young woman, and the implications of this abuse on her changed the woman that she would have been, I think, if she had had the opportunity to have something healthy.
It seemed like a lot of it was, began as survival instincts and just, something like surviving,
Mhm.
which is how trauma works. You figure out something that you can live with, or that seems like normalcy. And when you're getting to be a young woman who did have hopes and dreams and was trying to achieve them, and was working with children in schools, and was taking night classes to become a nurse, and was trying to make her way in the world, and then seeing everybody around her having families, having something, not anything like what her terrible experience was, missing her mother, missing her grandmother, missing her aunt, and feeling very lost, and thinking, maybe I can fix this. Again, I'm putting together something that
Mhm.
she should be here and alive to recover from and decide for herself. So I'm piecing it together just from some knowledge that I can figure it out, and then I can start my own family.
She was seeing a therapist. She was getting treatment for if she was feeling down. I mean, who wouldn't feel down after she lost such close family members the way she did? She was seeing a therapist. I know that she had an appointment to see her therapist on the day that she was found.
Correct. I'm not glad that you brought that up. It's terrible to talk about, but I want to mention something that's really important. So the fact that she was in treatment, which is all positive,
Yes.
you would want that for someone. What often happens in these situations, and I have experience with this in my own life, is that if you're being isolated and coerced, you might skip your therapist because this person is kind of shitting on it and saying, oh, you're just going to go there and talk about what a monster I am? Hopefully, God willing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then maybe become free of it. So, we don't get to know about those conversations, but any effort to get better means an effort that takes away from their control.
That's right.
And where I find this to be additionally troublesome, I'll say at the very least, is that the language of talking about Sandra seeking help or being in therapy was used as part of the Massachusetts State Police argument that this is why she died by suicide. This is among, we call them the Fanning lies, which is sort of dismissively answering to those who are asking, and by that I mean reporters, or family members asking, people like me asking, what happened, how did this happen, and why aren't you talking more to Matthew Farwell? He knew how, he was a detective. You guys are in the same job. And he said, one, Matthew Farwell is not a real detective. He's just, he was dismissive about the fact that this man had the capability to understand the inner workings of a crime scene and how to manipulate that in his favor, while he was clearly thinking about how to end her life. So he dismissed that, and then segued right into dismissing the fact that I know it's hard to grasp that she died by suicide, but I see it a lot. It happens all the time. She made an impulsive decision. Women are emotional.
We're the ones that get the shit done.
But I want you to imagine that's, saying that women get emotional was his dismissive, misogynistic, absolutely abysmal way of writing off. We don't really need to do anymore. We don't need to investigate, because that's just, women just lose their shit and just decide the moment that this monstrous human being is no longer going to be a part of their lives, that it's over, because they're just so magical that it happens within 3 minutes. It's an insane position to take, that's a justification for doing nothing more than just buttoning up that scene, as it just happens. Women We're emotional, and that stuff happens.
Going back decades, there were hospitals for women who were quote unquote hysterical. They wanted to have some agency.
Oh,
we
well,
weren't
that's where it all
we weren't
goes
allowed
wrong,
to
right?
have.
When you're pushing back and seeking freedom and safety, that's
Yeah.
where you're crazy, right?
Then you're a crazy bitch if
Yeah.
you have any sort of, if you raise your voice, then you're hysterical. Or if you're not just quiet and taking up as little space as possible and smiling all the time, then, you know, you deserve to be degraded. We've seen it.
Well,
We
but
continue
the
to.
unified decision by all of these players involved in her case definitely gets to me a lot. That there was no exploration into the possibility of what happened to this poor girl. You guys are just okay with just chalking it up to bitches be crazy.
Yeah. The way that cops, you know, high five and grab ass. Don't step on any toes in the blue line and all of the things that we've heard over the years. I cannot fathom the conversations that went on among these men when they found Sandra in the state that they found her and what they said about her because of this. The associations, I'm not going to say relationships because it wasn't relationships, the associations that she had had with men like the Farwell brothers and Divine. I'm sure that those people, those men, if we can't really call them men, tainted the information by just saying things like that dismissive, you know, wave your hand. She was just a crazy bitch. I didn't want to go out with her. I broke up with her. She's just a crazy bitch.
Well, Angela, you just reminded me of the third fanning lie on my shit list, if you will, which is that being asked about, well, didn't you think it necessary to explore anything further about Matthew Farwell once you knew that there was a longstanding abusive relationship of the statutory ilk? And his answer was, well, you know, she was with other guys. We've got the mental health shaming already. We've got the fact that, you know, it's just a suicide. You know, women get emotional. There's no stopping them from making these terrible decisions. And then you've got the I'm not going to use the word, but the shaming. Because,
you can use any words that you want.
well, I don't like to use the S word.
Yeah.
And it's not real. You're talking about a person who didn't ever get to experience a real romantic relationship.
That's
And when
right.
somebody says that there were other men, well, unfortunately, if there were any other men besides the monstrous people who were hurting her, they didn't stand a chance because these decisions and the behavior were not her own. That none of what happened was the true Sandra, and none of the true Sandra didn't get a chance to be her. She didn't get a chance to fulfill her hopes and dreams and have a naturally existing organic relationship with a normal human who loved her because they stole that from her.
Mm-hmm.
So don't talk about dating or flings or her, you know, making choices with other men because there were no choices.
No, she was programmed from a very young age by these monster men who have proven in these men, particularly Matthew Farwell being the prime example and having it all as evidenced in this affidavit. As time went on, he was very abusive, very violent. They spoke about it in these text messages about how he wanted to be abusive sexually. She did not know what to do.
And I can speak to this again. We're talking about pattern of behavior. She knew that if she was responsive and that version of kindness gratifying towards him, that she would get that attention, that she would see him. I mean, this was, to her, it was a relationship. To her, it was, okay, he wants to see me, he wants to be with me. When you've only experienced that kind of exploitation and pain, it's a bizarre kind of reward that to have him just show up, you know. And there is a point where this one really gets to me, that she's believing that him attending to any one of her asks and needs means that he cares or that he's coming around. And at that point where there's back and forth about the pregnancy, and he does this seemingly innocuous gesture of bringing her a ginger ale. And she speaks to, I think it was a friend, about how nice it was that he brought her a ginger ale because she was experiencing morning sickness, I'm sure, because that was the time frame. He brought her ginger ale and she thought he was a hero. He brought her a ginger ale so that he could case her apartment.
And he looked around and she couldn't figure out what he was doing.
And she thought he was being kind. She thought he was coming around. There's no level of comprehension that leaves room to understand the monstrosity of that behavior. Here's this loving, kind, energetic person who's excited that, oh my God, he brought me a ginger ale. It's awful that the bar is that low, that, so he spent 99 cents at Cumberland Farms and stopped by on patrol, most likely, to go here and then use your surroundings against you.
It was so evil, the way that he premeditated what happened on February 1st. Decided, thinking he's very clever, that now I'm going to placate her. Instead of him pushing back and not really wanting to respond to her and anything that she would bring up to him about this baby that was coming in the fall. Mind you, anybody who's listening is not aware of this part of the case. He was married and had 2 children, expecting a third that day. February 1st, he was expecting a child to be born within a period of hours. So at that point, he got in his head, I know how I'm going to fix this. So he went to her home. He cased the place. I mean, he had been there a number of times before, but he went there with the express intent to carve out his plan with how he was going to, quote unquote, take care of this situation, because he didn't want to be burdened with this baby that she was so very happy that she was having. She did want him involved. I want you to come to the my OBGYN appointments. I want to have a gender reveal. I want to have all of these things, which she should have been able to have when she said in her text messages with her friend, he's coming around. That's the moment that he made the plan. He was going to kill her.
That's certainly the conclusion that the FBI came to. They drafted out very craftily in that affidavit, those moments. And I don't wish it on anyone, and didn't even wish it on you, Angel, to sort of place yourself in the logistics of those moments. Those of us who have been in, acting in a way to try and get something like, I mean, we want full justice for Sandra Birchmore, obviously, but something even remotely like that didn't seem tangible or close for quite some time. Those of us who've been on that task for quite some time have already sort of felt and understood the depth of those moments in that story. And it's very overwhelming.
Let's switch gears for a moment. You have been such a strong proponent for Sandra and such an advocate. How did that come to be, Susanne?
I still find it tough to put into words, because it seems that it should be human nature to look at a situation like this and just say, this is unspeakably wrong, and I want to do something. It just so happens that this case, the news of it and the layers of it, broke in one of the most high-profile crime cases that we've had in Massachusetts history in a long time. So we're already in this, and I, as you know, I was present in a lot of that and continue to be. But when the news of this case dropped, and those of us were trying to find ways to express how to get everybody to pay attention to justice for Sandra, it was disorienting. There's already this outrage and this wrongdoing by law enforcement and this fear of what is happening to women. And then you get this story. And it was around, I mean, I've certainly participated in advocacy in other cases, but it was in September 2022, and when Chief McNamara's incantation of what had happened dropped, there were already a lot of eyes and ears available with regard to the high profile case in the same neighborhood, if you will. So we just sort of staggered into the scene with those signs and became acquainted with one another in this movement and continue to push forward. And when I was having dinner with my daughter last night, and I said, how do I put it into words? And she said, how about you have a daughter and you can't take this anymore? And I said, well, I've tried to keep you out of the story because you've got your own way of approaching things. And she said, oh no, screw that. It's a big part of it. You definitely see her in me and vice versa. And that's absolutely true. I do see a beautiful young woman with hopes and dreams and boundless energy that somebody stole from her, and that she somewhat resembles my own grown daughter. And when I put that in perspective, that my daughter's still here to fulfill her hopes and dreams, and I just can't let go of the fact that Sandra should still be here. And it turns out that I was semi okay at fact gathering and had something to lend to the story or the atmosphere, and have been, I guess someone else might have said, like, fiercely loyal to the movement. And can you continue to help? And I was just waiting for somebody to ask, really. But hell yes, we're going to keep at this until all three that we know of are in jail, and that there's some semblance of healing and safety that can occur following this terrible story. Because it shouldn't be about monsters. It should be about young women like Sandra Birchmore. That we shouldn't just be, the fact that it got so quiet should be terrifying. And we need to get that safety back. We don't have any way of determining or knowing the possibility of other victims, but hopefully the movement allows for the possibility of anyone who couldn't talk or didn't feel comfortable talking can see their way to a safe place to do so. And when I say safe place to do so, anybody's encouraged to reach out to any one of us as advocates, but only to be pointed in the direction of the safe professional. This isn't sort of a willy-nilly, we'll pick up the phone and tell your story. There's a delicacy to that. But the atmosphere of continued communication and to helping people understand the language of grooming, coercion, and the lack of safety, and the fact that those two elements are happening with law enforcement agents, they need to know that there's help available, and that the FBI is watching, and that they are in on it. And if you were ever thinking about getting out and getting to a place of safety, or even moderately telling your story, it's a good time to do it while all eyes are on it. Because the sooner you can get to that place, there can be something like healing, something like having a normal life, which is what Sandra deserved to have.
We really have a responsibility of being compassionate and having empathy. And these people did not have it. These people, these predators, these men who were directly involved in this case, we see that they are void of that. For whatever reason, I don't know what happened to them, and that's not up to me to find out. Time will tell what impact this case and the O'Keefe case will have on other people, because we know that there will continue to be reviews within the Mass State Police, within these police departments, within Stoughton's police department. I know that the chief spoke out. Was it the chief that spoke out?
Chief McNamara has spoken out quite a bit to express, her outrage and disgust with the behavior of these men and her and the effort of Chief McNamara and former Deputy Chief Holmes, I wouldn't argue that they didn't put in a tremendous amount of effort to try and suss out what happened with these men. They for sure did. But when that information was handed in, or when that file dropped, you know what happened? Not a whole lot, not nearly enough. Okay, so you lost your jobs. Too bad, so sad. You need to be held responsible to the fullest extent of the law. And there's a lot of conversations back and forth about how we won't stop until, this happens or that happens. Where did the FBI have to take over? Because it's a pretty big deal. It's a really big deal. And I don't even know if everybody's processed the impact of that. I just I was trying to explain to somebody the nature of the crime of Matthew Farwell, because there are all these arguments about, well, the FBI doesn't get involved in murder cases, and they do this and they do that. Well, the start of the charges, as I'm sure you well know, is killing of a victim witness. That is in bold type. That is the beginning. And what that means to me as a not law enforcement, not FBI, is that this person, Sandra Birchmore, had already been through horror and already been through enough in her life. And that man decided that she couldn't be here anymore when she was trying to stay alive. That's my understanding of victim witness, is there was a possibility of her being able to survive and be safe, and he decided no. And the fact that he was a law enforcement agent puts it in a whole other category. There's so much betrayal and so much lack of safety in his presence in his 38 years, but I would argue the most in the last 3.
He is a sexual predator.
But the last 3 years of still being out there and emboldened by, to use Josh Levy's own words, nearly getting away with it.
Oh yeah,
that man was planning. He
was banking on it.
He was banking on it, and he was definitely planning to get away. Imagine 3 years thinking, really, nobody's doing anything. Nope. Okay, well, I'm just going to keep making money. And by the way, I'm going to start bringing my, we're not supposed to discuss anything about anyone else, but bring someone with me as a human shield.
A juvenile.
And sort of live this dual existence of everything's fine. I'm just, we're just back to normal. So that he decertified from being a police officer. And I just very recently educated myself on what voluntarily decertifying means. It's a little confusing, but the bottom line of somebody opting to do that is to agree to whatever misconduct to a certain degree to pacify the powers that be, and to maybe make some kind of gesture to the outward public that you're able to be rehabilitated. And I'm going to call bullshit on that. Because in this case, we now know that he admitted to probably the worst of the worst already. I mean, it's documented, it's up on mass.gov that he committed statutory rape. Still nobody did anything about that. We'll circle back to that. But that was as a gesture to take energy and attention away from committing murder.
It's documented that he effectively resigned when this internal investigation was taking place. He clearly had no other choice but to leave the Stoughton Police Department at that period in time.
Yes.
Was his twin brother, William, also on the Stoughton Police Department?
Yes. So Matthew Farwell started on the Stoughton Police earlier than William Farwell, because William Farwell was still out working for the Army as a bomb technician. He was out being all he could be. I had to have a lot of trouble with that. He returned to continue to work in, some type of bomb training down on the Cape, but was back and forth as a volunteer for the Explorer program, ostensibly, to use his own words, checking in with Sandra from time to time and participating in her growing up. We don't 100% fully know what that looks like, because for whatever reason, William Farwell seems to be protected very much right now.
Was he also involved in the sexual abuse?
It's certainly documented that from 2019 on, or 2020 on, that's what he copped to as part of his misconduct. And I call these things sort of kernels of truth, is that you cop to what they have you dead to rights, right? So he admitted to that and being untruthful with the police department, and then invoked his military powers to get job placement with TSA in Maryland while this internal investigation was still in progress. And the military powers via, it's called the USERRA Act, means that you make a phone call to your commanding officer and say, I'm having some type of trouble at home, whatever that may be. You probably may be supposed to tell that it's being investigated, but he didn't. And you get protection for you and your family to get moved expeditiously and get a job placement. That was designed in order to help our veterans who fought bravely to keep us safe, and maybe suffered some type of damage during the course of that.
Not to invade an internal investigation of sexual abuse of a minor child.
Right. It's supposed to be so that when somebody returns from service, that they have job security and they're not just sort of written off into the ether as taking some menial job. Well, it certainly wasn't a menial job to be a law enforcement officer, one.
Right.
And two, it's still very puzzling to me how you can sort of just make that phone call and nobody really, well, I wouldn't say nobody batted an eyelash, because that's another layer of trouble, because there are investigations going on with other agencies to explore whether or not there was fraud committed. Obviously there was, because TSA didn't think it was a good look when they saw the news drop and they let him go. The job in Maryland at TSA ended, and subsequently he and his family moved to New Mexico. Nobody really knows what from there, except occasionally popping up for post-commission hearings and the civil trial.
Which is ongoing today, right?
Yes.
From Sandra's estate.
Yes, the civil trial, and I don't want to speak too much on that because everything's a work in progress, right? Mm-hmm. People are very critical of civil trials. We know that. I would push back on that and say, well, what else would you do if your loved one died that way and nobody did anything? Yeah. And there are multiple law enforcement agencies involved and you didn't get answers, and you realize that something is terribly, terribly wrong. And the only move is to raise holy hell by way of a civil trial. More power to them for doing that. We wouldn't be here with this broad sweeping motility happening right now. We wouldn't be here if not for that. I shouldn't say that. Obviously, the FBI had a hand in that. Public outcry, attention, and pushback on, hey, we're not just writing this young woman's life off. We're not going quietly into that good night and just saying, oh, women get emotional. Sometimes they just impulsively decide that it's over, in spite of all this insurmountable evidence that monster did this to her.
Let's talk about that evidence. Wow, that's a lot. And we will talk about that evidence. Thank you so much, Susanne, with Justice for Sandra Birchmore. You can follow along in real time for developments on the case. Justice for Sandra Birchmore, the Facebook group. They're very active. It is an energetic group for sure. And there are a lot of developments in the case and many more to come. Like, there was supposed to be a hearing on September 12th. That has since been canceled. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out before it actually goes to trial. And who else might be taken into custody before that time comes? Thank you for listening. My name is Angelle Wood. This is Crime of the Truest Kind, Massachusetts and New England crime stories. Thank you, Susanne. Thank you to the Patreon patrons. Welcome, Merrill, brand new this week. Support the show, everything at crimeofthetruestkind.com. Show notes, links, photos, and an easy way to contact the show. There's much more to the conversation with Susanne about justice for Sandra Birchmore, and we will get to that in episode 70. I'm gonna go. Lock your goddamn doors.